recorder's running, right?
Hey, Lance.
Hey, Brad. High energy. Let's go.
Let's go. I'm ready. I loved your Work Leader Weekly this week. I just, if folks out there are listening and they're not subscribed to Lance's newsletter, the Work Leader Weekly, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's my favorite read of the week, along with Work Tech Weekly. Both are really great, but you can subscribe for both at thestarconspiracy.com. I'm Brett Starr. I'm the CEO and founder of The Star Conspiracy, and I'm joined by
Lance Hahn, VP of Market Insights at The Star Conspiracy.
Sound like you're asking a question. Like, Lance Hahn?
Yeah. I'm Lance Hahn.
Yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
It's all good. I was just gonna say, yeah, it's actually like we've got a new website since we've talked last, and it's actually easy to find and subscribe to our newsletters, which is great.
It is, and I can't tell you how many people that I connect with on LinkedIn, for instance, are like, we know you guys, know all about you, love your newsletters. I mean, it's the thing that everyone brings up, both about Work Tech Weekly and about Work Leader Weekly. And what's Brandon's Work Fund Weekly? But it's
Fund
monthly.
Weekly. Yeah.
Work Fund monthly. Yeah, which is also great. But really happy to be talking with you today. We've been talking a lot about employee experience and our view of a holistic model for employee experience. And really, and one of the things that you touched on in your newsletter, which I also really liked, in addition to your article on quiet quitting, which we'll talk a little bit about, was just the relationship between employee experience and customer experience. And that's what our model is really all about. It's like looking at the relationship between employee experience, customer experience, and shareholder experience, and how that all has to exist in balance, and people have to give and receive value in the relationship in that ecosystem for the business to work and be sustainable. But we mostly talk about employee experience on this podcast, and we view employee experience as one of those three primary domains of experience, and we break it down into 5 subdomains, which are employer brand, recruitment marketing, candidate experience, work experience, and employee success. And we've been taking a slow stroll through those subdomains over the last several weeks. And today we get to probably one of the most controversial aspects of our model, which is that we distinguish between work experience and employee success. And I think that a lot of people, the stuff that we put into employee success, most people would think of as employee experience with a capital, EX. But we have a much higher level view of that. Employee success is one component. And then I don't really, you tell me, and we'll describe a little bit about this, but have you ever heard of HR people talking about the work experience versus employee success, or distinguishing between those two, or playing as much of a role in the work experience as they would like to?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't think they define it the same way. But lots of work leaders have talked about organizational design in particular for a really long time. And I'm thinking about just sort of how organizational structures are built, thinking about how offices are put together. And so I think they've thought about this, but I don't think they put it into an experience domain. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
I would. I'm curious, how would you define or distinguish between work experience and employee success within the context of the model that we use?
Yeah, I mean, I just described this for Inspiring Workplaces, their Inspire-a-thon. So I gave a 20-minute speech on this, and it was great. So like what we really define the differences between these two is employee success is all about the sort of the internal factors that make employees work. Like, so you think about internalizing like how you're physically doing. So we think about benefits, we think about engagement, we think about some of those almost the psychological factors that we talk about with recognition. When you get a piece of feedback, how that sort of fires your internal motor.
Yeah.
When we look at work experience, we look at everything that's external of that. So when you think about like work processes, you think about, are you a Google Suite or G Suite, whatever they're calling their thing now? Are you a Microsoft shop? What do you use for project management?
Mm-hmm.
How do you arrange your work days? What's the expectations for coming into the office? All those things are sort of external. And so I think you're right. I mean, I think most folks, when they're looking at experience and before that engagement, they were really looking at those internal factors, the employee success factors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reason that we constructed the model that way, first of all, I totally agree with you. And that's a much more elegant way of describing the difference between work experience and employee experience than I typically use. I basically, view work experience as stuff that actually touches the work or has an impact on the product or service that's being produced by a company. And employee success, or, it's almost like a meta layer of all the things that you do to support people at work so that they can do the work. It's not the stuff that touches the work. It's the stuff that enables people to bring their, full selves to work, right? And when you open up the conversation and distinguish between the two, you realize that the systems that you use, your workflows, to your point, the way your days are structured, the way the company structures days, if they have a day structure, all of that has a profound but different kind of impact on the employee experience than the employee success components. And so, you can have all of the great employee success stuff in the world, recognition programs, well-being programs. You can be deeply invested in, all kinds of strategies to, really support employees, especially through the pandemic. We saw a lot of that. But if the friction associated with getting work done is so significant that it's hard just to exist in the work environment, then none of that stuff matters because it's just too hard to work. Like at this point, excuse me, at this point, I feel like I've worked in a Google world for so long that I don't think I could work in a Microsoft shop. Like Microsoft gives me such fits that it would have such a negative impact on my work experience that it wouldn't matter how great and nice the company was. I just wouldn't be able to live there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm in the same boat. Like every time I have to, and we're obviously we're an experience agency and we work with lots of different clients. And when a client pulls me into a Microsoft Teams meeting and I'm on my MacBook, and it's just like the system just starts grinding to a halt. My camera's going in and out. I'm like, what is going on? I can't share my
screen.
I don't know how this works. What am I supposed to do with my hands?
Yeah.
It just gives me a lot of anxiety. And I feel like I'm pretty tech literate too. So it's not even that.
Well, what's really interesting is prior to the pandemic, I wonder how often HR was engaged in discussions about work systems that were adopted.
Yeah.
What voice they had in terms of, hey, we need to be a Google shop versus a Microsoft shop, or hey, we really need to adopt Asana instead of, Trello or, whatever. I feel like that's increased significantly because of this perception that there is an experience that's created and a culture that's created often by the systems that you use. So I feel that that's increasing. And I think that's also opened the doors to a lot of, things being viewed as work tech that weren't really viewed as, work tech before, when work tech had a much more narrow, kind of focus on HR software or HCM or, whatever label you want to use through the years. But I was particularly compelled in the context of this discussion of, the work experience and employee success by your great article about quiet quitting. Is quiet quitting real? What is quiet quitting?
Quiet quitting. Yeah, quiet quitting is basically, there's been a long storied history, and you kind of have to go back to, really what Gallup was doing earlier in the 21st century. It feels weird to say that, but in the early 2000s, when they were starting to measure employee engagement, and it was really just, how much discretionary effort were you willing to give to your company beyond just sort of the bare minimum? And so this whole notion of quiet quitting was that there's a whole class of workers out there that were just doing the bare minimum, not giving any discretionary effort to their employers whatsoever, and just sort of just hanging back. Mm-hmm. And it's been going on for 2 months now. Like I went back to my newsletter archive to see, when did I first write about this? When it first came out in August. As we're talking about, as we're gearing up to come back, lots of organizations were gearing back to come back to the office, either on a hybrid or on a full-time basis. And so it sort of brought this whole avalanche of Forbes and Fortune articles about quiet quitting. And then there's quiet firing. Yeah. And then there's all kind of, passive aggressive, quiet stuff going on in the background. And the conference was so in my newsletter, I actually mentioned this. The conference board actually did research on this, asked employees, are you quiet quitting? Everybody's like, no. More people were saying, 30% of people said, I'm actually doing more work than I was doing 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. And most people, 50% of them were just saying yeah, I'm doing the same thing. Yeah. Only 18% were actually saying yeah, I'm doing less. This is great. So it wasn't even, it's all been based off of stories, and it also followed this sort of micro trend of organizations sort of figuring out that some people were daylighting. So doing 2 jobs at once, basically, because remote work allowed you to do that. So I think it was associated with that, but I think more importantly, and maybe this is what we're alluding to or where we're going, is that people feel less connected. Whether they're producing more or not, what the research from the conference board showed was actually people do feel less connected. They may be just as productive, they may be working just as hard, but they still feel less connected to the organization.
Yeah, and so there's a work experience. Yeah, there's a work experience component there and an employee success component, right? Yep. The work experience component, I think, is a nut that has not been cracked yet, which is what systems, what processes, what workflows need to be brought to bear in a remote or hybrid environment to make people feel, more connected, a higher sense of social capital inside an organization. And then from an employee success perspective, how are we helping people be seen and feel like they're being seen and, instead of monitored, which is a big, situation right now. And one of the things that I really, and this is one of the things about a holistic model, around employee experience or customer experience or even shareholder experience. If you have a myopic view that an issue exists in a single area of the business, like the work experience or employee success, and you seek to solve that problem without considering the connective tissue in, all the other areas of the employee experience, then you can often be solving the wrong problem. And one of the things I really love that you pointed out in one of your articles is that HR people, just like lots of people in the world, often go looking for problems to solve. And we often give names or catchphrases. HR loves a good catchphrase, man. We love the Great Resignation, the war for talent, quiet quitting. That stuff just catches on like memes, Mm-hmm. But when we have this issues-based, mind frame instead of an opportunities-based mind frame, we go looking for problems that are based on our own insecurities or, things that we think are happening. It's like confirmation bias, right? So if managers feel the same sense of being disconnected from the teams that they're managing, some managers feel that their inability to keep tabs on people actually means that they're not doing anything, right? And so a phrase like quiet quitting, enters the mind through mainstream media. And suddenly it's like, oh, that's what it is.
That's what's happening.
Everyone around me is quiet quitting. Come on, really? Yeah. I mean, what does that look like? Because this is the part that I can't wrap my mind around quiet quitting. It sounds like almost a very Zen position where it's like, you know what? I'm just going to show up to work. And I'm going to, everyone's going to think I'm doing stuff. but I'm not going to do anything, and I'm going to collect a paycheck until they figure it out. And I'm going to be totally cool with that.
Yeah.
Like, who can do that? There's a word for that, and it's not a catchphrase. It's called a sociopath. Because any reasonable person would be freaking out every minute that they were going to be discovered. And doesn't this run like contrary to like another big, like this notion of imposter syndrome, right? Yeah. So which is it? Like, does everyone have imposter syndrome where they're afraid of being discovered as frauds despite their best efforts, all the time? Or are they capable of just completely checking out in almost a sociopathic way where they're not affected emotionally by the fact that they are screwing everyone around them? Yeah. Exactly. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. And that's the thing that drives me crazy about this is because, and it's a lot of times it's a reaction to something that, work leaders hear from, the managers that they're working with, the frontline leaders they're working with, and they're trying to diagnose it as well. So I think a lot of times it's not even driven necessarily by the HR and work leaders that I talk to, but a lot of times by like, these guys, I don't think they're working as hard. And it's like, well, what, I think the first question you have to be thinking about is like, what are you basing that off of? Do you just feel like they're not as, do you feel they're not like, what, a lot of times what I hear from work leaders, like when they're talking to their frontline managers, like they're not as enthusiastic about their job anymore. And it's like, okay, but what does that mean for what are they doing at work that's affecting? Like, are they underperforming? No, they're still doing good. Okay. Well, what's actually driving this? And to your point, most people are, I think, normal, which is like, you want to keep your job. You're going to do the things that you need to do to keep your job. You're not going to just sit passive aggressively collecting a paycheck until you're found out.
It's ridiculous.
It also runs counter to a lot of the things that are happening economically, which obviously this sort of macroeconomic environment is like very unusual. But still, you're starting to see voluntary quit rates starting to decrease a little bit because you don't want to be first into an organization as you're going into a possible recession or just possible economic disruption. So it seems like a terrible bet for anybody with half their wits about them. And so, you have to be a little bit more, I think, data driven on your questions about this rather than just feels like a very emotional thing right now.
Yeah, it really is. And, here's a great example of where kind of CX and EX come together. So I see this pattern all the time where I'll, talk to a CEO or something and they'll say, we're doing great in brand. We're doing great in marketing. Sales is really struggling to hit their numbers. The product is great. And customer success is like, we can't keep people there because it's triage. Everyone's hair is on fire all the time. They're always dealing with unhappy customers. And they view it as an employee issue. They're like, there's something wrong with the sales model. There's something wrong with the salespeople. Maybe the salespeople are quiet quitting. Maybe because salespeople have, always been remote more so than, other folks inside an organization. And so there's always been this inherent, almost organizational distrust of salespeople. So when there's a sales issue, there's a real tendency to say, well, the problem is in sales and it needs to be fixed in sales, probably by replacing the people, because from an employee experience perspective, they're quiet quitting, and that's having an impact on our customer experience, which is, our sales aren't where they ought to be. In almost every case where I see that duality of someone saying everything's great except we have a problem in sales and a problem in customer success, the actual problem is not with sales or customer success. It's that brand and marketing are setting expectations with buyers prior to the sales experience that are out of sync with what the product actually does, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they've got a recognition product and they're positioning it as an employee experience product in marketing and brand. And when people enter into a conversation with sales under the expectation that they're going to be seeing an employee experience product, what they actually end up seeing is a recognition product, then there's a break in continuity. Then, sales gets caught between a rock and a hard place of what the product actually delivers versus what marketing and brand are saying that it delivers. And over time, behavioral economics kick in. The salespeople are like, well, I have to hit my numbers. So, they start to change their story to match as much of the narrative that, people are coming in exposed to as they can. And that means that they're basically throwing customers over the fence who have the wrong set of expectations about what it is they're actually buying. And that manifests in customer success, constantly talking to customers who purchased something that was different than what they thought they were purchasing. So the problem doesn't get localized to sales or to customer success any more than it gets localized to CX or EX. And when you start to get this issues-based approach into your thinking instead of an opportunity-based approach, it's very easy to say the problem with everything in this organization, with our CX and our shareholder experience, our business results, is really because we have this group of people in our company who are quiet quitting. It's an EX issue, but that's totally, not filtered through a holistic view of how all this stuff fits together. So I take it from your comments that you don't believe that quiet quitting is a real thing.
It's not widespread. And I think it's one of those things where, I think one of the things that when I've talked to work leaders about our model for EX, and we take a very holistic, to your point, view of things, all of these things are connected. And you look across the 5 subdomains of employee experience, everything is connected to one another. And I think that's where we start opening their minds a little bit because they've experienced it. What they've attributed, now there's an attribution error a lot of times in organizations because you think about everybody has had, everybody as a work leader has had that hire that has come in with just off the wall expectations about like what's going to happen. Like, I'm going to get a raise the first 90 days. Like they never actually got that message, or maybe they got it implicitly. And that, but what happens is like, the attribute is that to that person misunderstood, not that we have a brand out there. We have an employer brand out there that does this, or recruitment marketing process that reinforces this, a candidate experience that, talks about like how quickly people rise inside the organization. Yeah. We have a work experience that prioritizes that. We have employee success metrics that are all driven by that. So like all your signals are pointing to this. And so, I think when you're looking at quiet quitting as sort of a thing, it's easy to attribute that to a employee that's just kind of dumb or has odd behavior or, has the ability to somehow ignore all the normal social signals that we get from work whenever we're not doing our job correctly. But I think more often than not, it's like all these things are contributing to probably that feeling of disconnection and to your perception that that's the reason why things are going well. I think we have a lot of challenges with that.
And the problem, to your point, could be completely one of perception. Yeah. And if you track back, where does the perception come from? It could be a work experience issue where people don't have the right systems or workflows or whatever to feel comfortable around what other people are doing and, connecting on a frequent enough basis. It's just a really interesting point. I'm curious about the flip side of that, which is something you brought up in the article as well, which is quiet firing. Quiet firing real?
I don't think that's real either, because I just have a high tendency to not think that we're doing this stuff, at least intentionally, in the way that we're doing it. So just to explain what quiet firing is, it's basically it's kind of almost reaction to quiet quitting, I guess, as at least it's been described to me, is this idea that you just basically just start passing that person over for intended raises or promotions, and you're not inviting them to meetings anymore that they should be invited to. You're promoting people around them, but not them. Those sorts of things. And so basically you're letting people self-select out of your organization because you're not putting any time or effort towards that person. I think a lot of times that happens unintentionally inside of work. That actually happens a ton inside of a lot of organizations like that. Like, oh shit, yeah, we messed that up. We totally missed the ball on, giving you that development opportunity. Like, let's get you signed up. Like, sorry about that. A lot of times those are the systems, the work experience systems we have in place that aren't helping us on that front. But as like a conscious reaction to quiet quitting, you're like, well, I'm not going to invite that person to do that. Or no, I don't think that's happening either.
Well, this is the part that I can't wrap my mind around. It's like, you're still paying them, right? I mean, so
just fire them if they're doing bad, right?
Right. So basically the notion of quiet firing is, we're just going to stop paying attention to this person and pretend that they're not here, except that we're still paying them. And that we're still dependent upon them in terms of their work product is landing somewhere, unless the person who's also, who's being quiet fired is also quiet quitting. Then, what organization in the world keeps paying someone and, allows ongoing delivery of subpar work without doing something about it? I mean, I know that people are conflict averse, but not to the point where at some point, a red light doesn't go off on someone's dashboard saying, wait, this person, we're paying and they're not doing anything, or everything that they do causes problems for everyone else. At some point, like, there's an intervention. And I think, to your point, what solves a lot of these issues is just talking. It's like, hey,
it's amazing.
Yeah. Tell people what you want, what you need. Tell people, what is working and what's not working, and, kind of like all the directions of the relationships that you have. And I know it's tough to, kind of put the burden on everyone to advocate for themselves, or everyone to have candorous conversations about work. But failing, some grand invention that hasn't been made yet, I mean, it still comes down to people, walking through this world together and trying to figure stuff out. And if you're not talking, you might end up in a scenario where you start to believe in all these like crazy notions, like quiet firing and quiet quitting.
I think the communication thing, though, too, is like, again, going back to the holistic view of employee experience. What expectations are you setting about your culture from the very first time they hear about you?
That's right.
And I feel like if you're going into a culture where like open conversations aren't accepted, I guess maybe that's an instance where like you're quiet quitting. Maybe, I don't know. I just have a lot of doubts about that. And I think the quiet firing thing too is a lot about the saber rattling around. Who's going to be first to get laid off? And it's like, well, if you had people that were already not pulling weight, were quiet fired, to your point, Brett. I mean, what are you doing with these folks? Like, are you just letting them sit on payroll until there's an easy excuse to let them go?
Yeah.
You're not talking to that person at all in between now and when this future change in staff is going to happen. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Which is probably going to manifest if it does, because you just, neglected, your fiduciary responsibility to actually have a company that performs well, right. In this fake world where there's these like fake things like, quiet quitting and quiet firing. Well, if you quiet fire enough people, then eventually you're going to have a layoff because your business is going to be underperforming. Right. And then you'll sweep them all up, in that. I don't know.
It's just a weird thing, but like I said, I think for the most part, and I'd love to just keep, I think as we keep moving forward here on talking about the work experience, talking about employee success, inside organizations. I mean, there's just lots to talk about. And I think to your point, I think earlier in the conversation, you mentioned like sort of the myopic focus on one of those things sort of eliminates the thinking about the holistic picture. Yeah. What are you painting for folks if you're just, you're looking at this little piece of things for so long and you're just obsessing about this one problem instead of looking at the whole opportunity you have here?
Yeah. And to put a fine point on it, Like if you view your employer brand and your recruitment marketing and your candidate experience as a sales job of telling people what you think they need to hear in order to come to work for your company, much like people often do in the CX perspective, brand and marketing and sales views it's their job. It's like, in the CX world, there's this notion of ideal client profile and personas, right? And personas are really an exercise in saying, okay, here's the total available market, and here's the group of people that we sell to in any particular company. And they care about different things, and different kinds of companies care about different things. Let's figure out what they care about so that we can tell them what they want to hear so that we can close them as customers. And often that leads to, instead of attracting people who are your radical buyer because they have a certain set of attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs that, tend to be aligned with the worldview or the vision or purpose of your organization, you're basically bringing people in with a false pretext. And then when they actually, start working with your company and using your product and find out that it's really out of alignment with what they were told, that creates a huge break in continuity. When in fact, the product could be great, but it's great for some people and not great for others based on the expectations that were set, right? So it's the same in, employee experience. If you think that employer branding and recruitment marketing candidate experience is an act of telling people what you think they want to hear because it's such a competitive market so that you can get the people that you need, and those expectations that you set are different than what your work culture actually is, what your work experience and your employee success experience are, it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with your work experience or your employee success experience. It's just out of sync with what their expectations were going through the, employer brand, the recruitment marketing, and the candidate experience. And I mean, I've got like, I'm a big like decentralized autonomous organization guy. I'm a big flat guy. I'm a big like, management is a burden and a tax, guy. But that's just my view, right? Like, I don't have a problem with a really organized command and control environment where it's like, I'm the boss and, you report to me and, you've got people that report to you and I don't want to hear from any of them. I only want to hear from you. And I'll tell you when to have a good idea and when not to have a good idea. Hey, that's a very efficient form of operation for some companies. And some people want to work in a very controlled environment where their job description is really clear, where, their mandate is really clear, where they know who they report to and how they're going to be judged in terms of their performance reviews and all that stuff. There's nothing wrong with that environment inherently.
Yeah.
But when you're going out in the world and saying, wow, we've got this amazing creative workforce and, you're going to come in and here's a case study of Jimmy, and Jimmy, started in the mailroom and within 3 years, he was the vice president of sales. And that might even be true, but is it the case study that's representative of what the employee experience is for most people or the work experience is for most people? And it's just that, kind of the delta between the expectation and the reality where people get into trouble.
That's right. And employee experience is an everyday thing. Like, I mean, you experience it every single day. So the expectations that were set ahead of time, I kind of compare it to like, we've all had like a bad job where like every day, like I've had that commute where I'm just like, I'm getting heartburn on the way in, I'm getting heartburn on the way out.
Punching the ceiling.
Yeah. Just like going like, I compare it to like, being in a bad car, which I think a lot of people have had a bad car before, like, which like every day you get in, it's too hot because the AC doesn't work. You get out and your back is sore because the seat's a piece of shit. It's just like, it's an everyday thing. And the happiest day in your life is getting rid of that car. Yeah. Like, that's what like if you set the experience that you're going to get this like cushy Lexus and instead you're getting like an 85 Honda Accord, which I actually drove for a long time. Great car, except for like every aesthetic comfort was gone and missing. But yeah, I mean, like, that's what EX is like. And so if you're just looking at it through this narrow lens of employee success, you're missing all the stuff that led up to this, that discomfort, to think that, your expectations were set from the beginning and all you're getting now in the work experience and employee success is a bunch of frame breaking, expectation killing, morale killing sort of things, because it could have been a good job.
Yeah.
If you came in with the expectation that it was going to be the way it was, you might have expected different things.
Yeah, I agree. Employee experience is an everyday kind of thing. And sometimes I have fun thinking of it as like a bank account. It's like you're either putting a deposit into that account or taking out a withdrawal with every interaction that you have at the organization. And sometimes those withdrawals are huge. Sometimes they're small. Sometimes the deposits are huge. Sometimes they're small. But the defining moments within that employee experience, whether they're all-time lows or all-time highs, are going to start to stack up and paint a picture that becomes inescapable at one point. And the higher you get that balance, you can still erode the balance, but it takes a long time to erode the balance. Just like, it takes a long time to bounce back from a persistently bad or negative employee experience.
That's right.
So it's just every interaction, every day is adding or detracting from the perception of the quality of time that somebody spends with your company, whether they're an employee or a customer or a shareholder. And that's the mindset that you have to have is, every moment's important and some moments are defining moments.
Absolutely.
And you have to take control of those. I mean, they exist, whether, you have thought about them or not. There are defining moments in your employee experience, and it'd be really good for you to know what they are and whether they're all-time highs or all-time lows and to do something about them.
That's right.
So last question, what's your problem with Forbes?
I just, it's good for what it is, I guess.
What is it? I don't even know
it's kind of like, I feel like professional BuzzFeed sometimes.
Yeah.
Like when I read some of the stuff there, I've read a lot of good stuff on Forbes too. So it feels like, but it's also just driven by who's writing it at that time. And it seems like Forbes has really no editorial POV. And I always have a problem with that. Like, just like, yeah, we'll publish like two, like very like different points of view with no like thinking about like what are readers thinking about that. Like, employee engagement's not real. Employee engagement is the most real thing that you've ever known. Like it just messes with me rather than like, no. I mean, I just use it as an example.
Yeah. How many times have you been approached about spending money with Forbes so that you have the privilege of writing content for them? Because honestly, I think it's a content farm, but they've almost got like a reverse model where it's like you pay to be able to produce content that runs in Forbes, right? Yeah. Not everyone, but this is a model. This is a real thing that exists. Don't sue us, Forbes. And yeah, sometimes people pay and their content is amazing and they just needed that, channel to get their content out into the world. But a lot of times people pay and what they write is not grounded in any kind of reality or science or,
Well, and I mean, to your point, it can be a really effective program if you're looking to graduate from that program. Like if you're looking to build enough of an audience to take it with you or to go to the next thing. I think Josh Burson was like a early contributor to like the Forbes HR Council. He's not on that anymore. Like,
but I think it was different back then.
I think it was too. Yeah, probably you're right.
Yeah, it was not as monetized a model as it is.
I don't think he paid for it either. So
no, Josh Burson, are you kidding me?
No. I don't think he paid for it. So like, I just say that as like at some point, if you're a good enough writer, you could get published in Fast Company. You could get published in places where they actually exert some level of editorial control and aren't just trying to monetize the writer. They're trying to monetize the reader, which is what they should be doing.
Well, and to be clear, when I said there's no way Josh Burson was paying, it's because he is so well known and is so diligent and works so hard and does such a great job. He doesn't have to pay to put his content anywhere. People are like paying him to get his content,
Yeah, absolutely.
But, just in closing, I think that, content didn't make it through the wormhole of internet monetization fully intact.
Say that again.
Even like, I love the New York Times, but God bless America, like Wirecutter and, stuff like that are all paid product placement. They ruin for me the perceived objectivity of the reporting in the paper. And somewhere, someone in a boardroom said, no, these are different things. This is about buying stuff, and people are going to be able to separate those in their mind. And they won't care that, if they log into the New York Times every day, once a week, they're going to see the same article that says, we tried every cast iron pan there was, and this is our favorite. It's like, really? That was your favorite last week. And it was their favorite the week before that, and the week before that. That's like, how many ad runs did that, field cast iron company buy? It's great cast iron, but come on.
Yeah. They just keep buying it. They're obsessed.
Yeah,
I will say this. I mean, like, again, going back to the customer experience, it's like once you figure out that like something like that is pay for play at some level, that's a defining moment in the customer experience of like, or, whatever you want to call it, reader experience, whatever, where I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna have to find something more objective now. Like, or I'm gonna have to find something that's actually going to speak to my needs as a reader.
Well, look at BuzzFeed. Now, this is we're way off topic now, but like, look at BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed used to be an incredibly credible organization. They had amazing political writers. They had amazing business writers. I mean, the whole story about Zenefits was broken in BuzzFeed, right? And then, they started to create all this monetization, model around their content. And what they said was, oh, this is just the candy that, attracts people. And then we're going to, really give them the meat and potatoes. And it's just a way to get them to engage with our more serious content. But you look at it today, and it's like that monetization model has completely eaten the quality content. And BuzzFeed is just like, I don't even know what BuzzFeed is anymore.
No, I mean, we hired somebody from BuzzFeed News, and it's unfortunately been a long time coming. With that organization, it's driven by I forgot who their parent company is now, but it's all like driven by just monetization metrics now. Which is, you can't just do it purely on that.
Eyeballs, clicks, and dollars.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was great catching up. I look forward to doing it again next week and talking more about work experience.
Let's get deep into work experience. I think what I'm excited about is like, we can talk about this next week, but like the HR and CIO roles have never been more interconnected, and it's all driven by work experience. It's so cool to see.
Well, I am so old that I actually really remember reading an article about this thing called a CIO and why companies need one. Right. Exactly. And I was reading customer experience vision statements the other day for some research that I was doing. And Workday has a great customer experience vision statement. Their vision statement is to basically put people at the center of enterprise software. Yeah. And when you think about that, and Dave Duffield's journey through PeopleSoft and Workday, they did it. They did it. It's like the center of enterprise computing used to be manufacturing, and then it was supply chain, and then it was ERP driven finance stuff. And now it really is people. And so they did it. And you cannot deny the fact that like work experience is impacted so significantly by a market that is pretty new relative to the march of time. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things to talk about there.
Yeah. Well, we'll have something to talk about next week.
Until next week.
All right, man.